Hey everyone, welcome to the CareerMetis Podcast. This is your host Nisar Ahmed, and this is episode 94 of the CareerMetis Podcast. And for this particular episode, I'm continuing the Leadership Expert series. If you have listened to any of our previous episodes in this series, we talk about the topic of leadership. For yourself, we interview guests, they share their ideas, and how you as a career professional can apply that to your career. And for today's Leadership Expert Series episode, I'm interviewing Michael O'Brien from Peloton Coaching. He is a leadership coach. He's also the author of the book called Shift, Creating Better Tomorrow. I'm sure we'll learn more about all of that in a moment. Hey, Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Nisar. I'm so psyched to be here, and I've been listening on your other interviews, and I'm really excited to add to the conversation about leadership because it's a topic that I have a lot of passion about. So yeah, I can't wait to talk through the whole topic.
Did I say your company name correct? Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yep. So Peloton Coaching, a lot of people sort of link it to those exercise bikes, Peloton cycles. It's not the same, but we use the same word as a metaphor for a tribe at work. So a Peloton is basically a group of cyclists in a bike race. Mm-hmm. And so your listeners will understand why that's meaningful as we go through our conversation together. But so for me, it's like a tribe, a culture at work, because a Peloton, if it works well, it has leadership and communication and trust and collaborations, just like some of the best work teams out there.
No, that sounds great. I'm going to ask about that in a moment as well. One of the first fun questions I always ask my guests is, where are they calling from?
I am calling from beautiful New Jersey on a nice day that gives us a hint of spring and summer. So it's been a brutal winter here for us. And so this is like one of the first really warm, sunny days. So everyone around here is in an awesome mood.
Where exactly in New Jersey? I've been to a couple of places in the past.
Yeah, so I'm in Bergen County, which is where my town is, a town called Tenafly. We're right on the Hudson, a river just north of the George Washington Bridge. So for me to get into Midtown Manhattan, it's about, with no traffic, it's about 40 minutes or so.
Oh, that sounds great. I've spent some time, maybe a few days at Jersey City, and you can see the entire skyscrapers, the entire downtown Manhattan from there. So, and everything, it's amazing. One thing I loved about New Jersey and New York, it's so accessible by public transit. Public transit isn't that expensive, and you can get from point to point very quickly. So that's something that really impressed me when I was there.
Yeah, no, New York City is, for anyone that hasn't been, you should definitely come. For me, it's a great example of what's possible in the world. So when we get a little depressed with what's happening in the world in terms of violence and tribalism and just conflict, I look at New York City and I'm like, this could be the example. We throw 8 to 10 million people into a very close-knit space from all different backgrounds, all around the world with different points of view. And we live in relative peace. There's still issues, right? But we get along. And I think it's really possible through, when we bond together, we can live with different points of view and different perspectives in the world if we really listen to each other and we look out for our common brother and sister. So New York to me is like this city of optimism, to be honest.
No, that is so true. I can go on about how much I loved New York. I've been there 4 or 5 times. And what people tell me is it'll take an entire lifetime to go through everything in New York. Every time I go there, I come back wanting more. So that is so true.
Very cool.
Michael, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? I'd love to hear your story.
Yeah, so my life has always been in sales and marketing. And one of the things that I really thought of myself as a leader, and I could go all the way back to my childhood. I love the leadership roles that I played, in sports. And now, current day, I'm an executive coach. So I help leaders lead better. I help their teams. But prior to opening Peloton Coaching and Consulting in my executive coaching company, I was a leader mainly in the pharmaceutical industry. So I spent 22 years in the pharmaceutical industry as a sales rep, as an individual contributor. But then I worked my way into marketing and then leadership levels, and then finally executive leadership. So I was part of the executive committee. I was one of our youngest executive committee members at the time when I got promoted to that level. And I really didn't set out to get to that level. It sort of just happened. So, but that experience in terms of leadership and how to build culture and how to communicate and bring out the best in people is something I just love doing. I always knew after what I call my last bad day, which I know we'll talk about, that I would get into executive coaching. So now I try to help people really show up because leadership is so important. Leadership matters so much, not only in terms of business results, but in terms of how we build people up and how we can help them become the best versions of who they can be.
Sounds good. So that brings me to my next question. Like you mentioned leadership a couple of times, and this is what the interview is about. A favorite question I have for any leadership expert or coaches I've interviewed, and I'll ask you as well, what does leadership mean to you? What does that signify when you think of that?
So for me, so it's a great question. For me, it's about vision, right? So a leader is taking us somewhere, and that somewhere is probably outside of our comfort zone. It could be uncharted waters, trailblazing, if you will. And so he or she is like setting this course, right? And they got the compass, they know where to go. Now, in order to have followers, because every leader needs followers or they're really not a leader, you have to have great communication. Obviously, you have to have trust. But for me, first and foremost, leadership is about setting a vision in terms of innovation and breaking through the status quo.
Setting a vision and breaking through the status quo. So I'm hearing a lot about personal growth, right? Not only for the people who are following that leader. One of the things I really loved when I read your website, and this is something I have, you mentioned something about a lifestyle of do, have, be.
Yes.
And I've heard of that. And I mean, this is something from your site. I mean, this is before you transformed yourself and into a coach. I was living a lifestyle of do, have, be. I was working super hard, which is a do, to have that title, new car, bigger salary or whatever, have. So I could eventually be happy. At least that's what I thought. Does it sound familiar? So I want to hear about the story that transformed you. But before that whole concept of do, have, be, or be, do, have, what are your thoughts? What is your insights on that?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking about that. So, because I think this is really important because I do think there's a whole bunch of us current day that are sort of living these like do, have, be lifestyles. And in some ways, it's like, I will be happy when, fill in the blank, right? And so before like my big seminal moment that changed my life, I was chasing happiness. Like I would answer that question. I will be happy when I got promoted. I will be happy when I got the new car. And so I would work really hard. That's the do, like, put my head down. Today we call it hustling. Back when I was younger, we just called it hard work. But I would just like plow forward. I would create a to-do list. I would put things on my to-do list that I had already completed just to cross it off, right? Like just going, because I really thought that's what society wanted from me. Go to college, get a job, marry the girl, have a family, work really hard at your job. And then I would have like all the external markers of success, the house, the family, the car, the title, the money, all that jazz. And then I would finally be happy. And I would chase and chase and chase, much like a hamster, on its wheel. And from time to time, I actually caught the happiness. Like I got the new car, I got the promotion, things settled down at work after the meeting was over. And I was happy for a moment or two. But then the happiness was fleeting. It sort of flew away, sort of like every great vapor finish line. Uh-huh. And so what it left behind was like hope, that the hope in my mind that if I kept on chasing, I could eventually catch it for good. And I just kept on chasing and chasing and chasing. I think so many people nowadays have that. And what we have is a whole bunch of external markers of success. but we're not successful inside. So as I was chasing, I was pouring a lot of stress inside. I was trying to be Superman at home. I was trying to be Superman at work with all the answers. I was the marketing director for my company's biggest drug. Like if we sneezed as a drug, as a product, the company caught the flu, right? So if we missed in other words, if we missed our goal by 1%, then the whole company missed its goal. So there was a lot of pressure I put on myself as I was sort of chasing this happiness. And then I had my last bad day. So, which I know we'll talk about here in a bit.
And what you said, the narrative you mentioned is very common for everyone, right? Everybody has a conditional happiness. If I do this, this will happen. If I do this, I'll be happier. I'll be more satisfied. But then they're always chasing. They don't really achieve. I mean, even if they achieve it, they still feel that void and they keep raising the stakes. What I know you mentioned on your website that right now you decided at a point in your life where you started to live a life of we do have. And what I would like to learn is now, why did you make that shift from do have be to be do have, and what happened, and why it changed, etc.
Yeah, no, the great question. So I realized that living the life of like do have be was toxic, and I wasn't going to be happy. And I had to flip the script. So the way I flipped the script was like, I changed the order of the words to basically show up every day intentionally, trying to be happy as an example, and then do the things that happy people do, like express kindness and empathy and gratitude and all these other wonderful things that we read about, we hear about. And then as a result, you actually have more happiness. You get closer to that definition, which is different for everyone, of complete success. So I learned this through what I call my last bad day. So I'm an avid cyclist, hence the name of my company, Peloton Coaching and Consulting. And I was out at a meeting in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico. So we went out there from New Jersey. It was a classic sales and marketing type of summit meeting. We arrived on Monday. We're going to depart on Friday. And I have this goal of riding my bike in every one of our 50 states. So I was like, I'm going to bring my bike out. It was July, the week of July 10th. And I was like, all right, look, it's summertime. It's New Mexico. I'll miss the hotel gym. I'll get some fresh air. It'll make me really energized for the meeting. And I found a 2-mile loop on the hotel property, went out the back parking lot to a service road, and then I would come up the main entrance. It was 2 miles. I thought if I did 10 laps, it'd be 20 miles and it would be a great way to start the day. And then on July 11th, that Wednesday, I was doing my laps, and on the 4th lap, I came around a bend, and an SUV was coming right at me. He had crossed into my lane. He was going about 40 miles an hour, and I had no time to react. And I remember the sound of me hitting his grill, flipping into his windshield, the screech of his brakes, and the thud I made as I came to the asphalt below. And he was fully in my lane. There's some photos on my website. Some of them you can sort of capture where the truck was after he hit me, but he was fully in my lane. It was just a freak accident. A minute on either side, the whole thing could have been missed completely, or 5 seconds on either side. The result could have been a lot worse. But I got knocked unconscious, as you would imagine, and the EMTs arrived.
Wow.
And I was in the worst pain of my life. Like I even the thought of moving was painful. And I tend to use humor to cut tension, and it was really tense. It was like I could tell, not by what they were telling me, but by just their energy and their body language, that this was a life and death situation. So I asked them a question another cyclist can really appreciate. I asked them, "How's my bike?" And they looked at me in this great, puzzled look, and they're like, your bike's okay. We want to try to save your life." And I remember trying to will myself not to fall asleep. So I was really sleepy, and basically I was about to pass out. And since I had a little bit of this thing with control, right, I figured I can control everything and living the life the way I was doing, then things would be good. So I was trying to control whether or not I was going to pass out or not. So I kept on telling myself, Michael, whatever you do, do not fall asleep. I was really worried that if I fell asleep, I may never wake up again. And so they called the helicopter, the trauma helicopter, to take me to the trauma center at Albuquerque, in Albuquerque at the University of New Mexico. It was a 19-minute flight. And as the helicopter was landing, I told myself, if you live, and again, I didn't know the extent of my injuries. I just knew I was in the worst pain of my life. And there was a lot of panic on the scene. That if I lived, life would be different. And I would stop chasing happiness. And I would just I'd be present, right? So the whole like do have be and be do have is about being present in our moment, which I wasn't doing a good job of prior to this accident. And I just made a commitment that I was going to live my life that way going forward if I lived. And I remember everything about the 19-minute flight. I never took my eyes off my flight nurse. We landed on the rooftop at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. I went down the elevator into the trauma center. I met my surgeon. I met my anesthesiologist. And then I don't remember anything for the next 4 days and change when I was in the ICU. And eventually I came out of the ICU into the orthopedic wing of the hospital. And I started to learn a little bit more about my accident and the extent of my injuries.
So, wow, at that point, you realized that you had to go through that experience to realize that being present was something that you were not doing and you started to do moving forward.
Yes, but not right away. So I made that commitment that life was going to be different. But as I learned about the accident, life was different, but not in the way I intended. It got really dark really quickly, sort of in the spirit that we go where our eyes go. So the doctors told me the driver had a revoked license, so he should not have been driving that day. They told me that I would have a lifetime of limitations, more surgeries, probably be dependent upon other people. So they started painting this picture of all the things that, I didn't have anymore, right? So I really thought, like, if I can't be who I was, who am I, right? And I got scared, and I got pretty dark, and I got revengeful. I was thinking about it. I thought the driver took from me, he harmed me, an eye for an eye. I was going to get back at him. When the hospital got dark at night, when all my visitors would leave, I would cry myself to sleep frequently and just wonder, like, why me? Why did this happen to me? I just thought life was so unfair. And then eventually they flew me back to New Jersey to some other hospitals. And then I finally had a moment that I call sort of my shift, or aha, if you will, where I realized if I was going to be the best I could be, the best husband and father and person and leader I could be, I'm not comparing myself against anybody else, because I was doing a pretty good job of comparing my success against everyone else's success prior to my accident, that I was just going to be the best version of who I could be and try to reach that destination of complete success, that I had to shift my mindset. I had to show up differently. I had to think differently. I had to point my eyes in a different direction so I could see the possibilities of my last bad day and not all the limitations. And so that moment was sort of the moment where I was like, okay, I need to be more present. I needed to start like being, doing, and having. And it was a big moment, but it wasn't a light switch, unfortunately. Like, sometimes we hope change happens really quickly, especially when it's positive change. It was a big spark of awareness, but my path from that moment, it hasn't been linear, right? It's been up and down and curvy and tossy-turvy and the whole thing. But that was a big moment where I was like, if I'm going to be the best I can possibly be, then I have to shift my mindset.
So could you explain the now, just so that the audience is understanding, right? So you gave a great example of do, have, be. With your experience, you started shifting to be, do, have. Can you give us a little bit more explanation or clarification on what that is and why that is important?
Yeah, I think so many of us, why it's important is so many of us have our thoughts in the past, like the regret of the past, the worry of the things that we did before, right? So for those that have a meditation practice or just are really aware of what their inner critic or that voice in their head, their monkey mind or gremlin, whatever we call it, a lot of times we sort of kick things around, right? Or we just process things that have happened yesterday or last hour or last year, or we have anxiety about the future, about what's to come, right? That meeting that's next week, or what's going to happen, a year from now. So when we're in yesterday or we're worried about tomorrow, we're not here today. And this is so important for leaders. So when we're there, then we're not with our people. We're not with those significant others in our lives, like our friends and our family. And so it's so important to just be present and connect. So many of us, right, are on our phones, and I'm not going to hate on our phone and social media. Social media brought us together today.
That's true.
So I think there's some real power in it. But when we're not present, it's harder to connect with each other. It's harder to build trust. So for me, like we can take happiness as an example, or we can take even like mindfulness. So like part of it is like being mindful. So, okay, well, what are the things that mindful people do? Well, mindful people, spend some time sort of looking in the mirror, right? They try to, gain some self-awareness. They have maybe micro meditations throughout the day. I like to call them PBRs, which is not Pabst Blue Ribbon, but pause, breathe, and reflect moments, or they meditate for a little bit longer. So they become more mindful of what's around them. So instead of reacting in the whole saber-tooth tiger fight flight type of reaction of our brain, they can be more responsive. So their do is, I'm going to respond, not react. And as they start to do that more and more, what actually happens is that they get even more mindful, more thoughtful. And this is so important for leaders today, because many of the leaders out there are making, they're not making multi-million-dollar decisions, they're making decisions that are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars. And so making the right decision becomes even more important in a very competitive world. So being mindful is so critical to success. Happiness is another one where, you want to show up and say, today I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be grateful for what I have, right? So that might be something that a happy person would do. They have a gratitude practice, or they set their intentions in the morning, or they express kindness to a stranger. And what usually comes back to them is more happiness. And they actually have more happiness. So just reversing those around a little bit changes our perspective, and it can change how we show up in life.
So how does that tie into leadership? So I want to go back to what he just mentioned at the beginning, where leadership is about having a vision and motivating people to think beyond themselves, to grow. So this whole concept of be to have, could you explain how that would apply to someone who wants to grow their leadership skills?
Yeah. So as a leader, we certainly set our vision, we're charting our course, but someone who can be more mindful and sort of live this, be to have type of approach, they can also detach from the final outcome. A lot of times we set a goal and we're so wrapped up around it that we are always thinking about the outcome and not what we have to do today, right? Success is built by having a big audacious goal, right? So as good to great would, illustrate. But we also have those micro things that we have to do each and every day. So that changes, that can be the big idea, but we have like drip by drip, conversation by conversation, day by day, and we string those days together. That's what builds our success. Showing up in the right way. So the be, do, have approach, yeah, we can have a big goal, but when we're present, we can focus in on the task at hand. We're not going to get distracted by the shiny objects. Like, we're going to get stuff done, but we're going to get the stuff done that truly matters. And then we do that. And if we can do that as a team, or we can do that as a organization or a culture, then we start building momentum. And that goal that, that was once thought of as like, wow, that's a big goal, now starts to sort of look within reach. And as we get stuff done, we actually change the conversation that we have with ourselves, which is so important. Like we build our own inner confidence, and we feel like we can do even more. And so it has this great like anabolic building effect towards success. And I think the great leaders out there have it. They don't have to all be extroverts. Some can be more reserved and quiet, but they all can set a big vision and they can be really present with the task at hand as opposed to getting distracted.
Okay. No, that is a great answer. So a question I have is, if someone aspiring to be a leader, what are some of the steps that you would recommend them to take? Any suggestions for actions or feedback?
Yes, I would definitely advise having a mentor, right? Someone that you can lean on. Obviously, I'm a coach, so I'm a little bit biased there too. So a coach also works. I would work on like their self-awareness, as a building block into emotional intelligence, and really fine tune that, in terms of how they manage themselves, but how they interact with others. And if they have some of those key elements, those key ingredients, that's a great foundation into leadership. What happens for a lot of leaders is that we get our first job and we can do fairly well. And then we keep on getting promoted. But as we get promoted, our emotional intelligence, as well as our conversational intelligence, tends to atrophy. Because as we grow our career, we're surrounded by fewer and fewer people. And that smaller group of people around us tend to tell us exactly what we want to hear. So, and we've already shown that we have a history of being right. Mm-hmm. Right? The reason why we're getting promoted is that we've been successful. But the higher we go, the more disconnected we can become to like our customers, to our people. And then we lose that emotional intelligence, that muscle. Again, it atrophies, or our ability to have a conversation. So as a building block, I think people should definitely get a mentor and then work on trying to really build their emotional intelligence. And the third thing is, be a thirsty learner, right? And believe that you're always growing. There's so many people out there, like they're in their 40s and I'm a little bit past 40, but they're like, wow, I sort of reached it. And I'm like, come on. I'm like, you're only at halftime in your career, right? You have another 20 years and maybe another 20 years past that. And I always love being surrounded by people who think like, my last step on this planet is going to be my best step. That I'm not going to peak at 40 or 42. I'm going to peak at, 82 or 92. And so it's developing at an early age this attitude that I'm going to be a lifelong learner, and I'm going to sort of journey down this goal of mastery, of trying to become the best I can be.
That sounds amazing. So Michael, if after listening to this, people want to get in touch with you, what would you recommend? How can they reach you?
So the best bet is to go to my website, which is michaelobrienshift.com. You can also give me a call. Phone number is 201-697-6820. And my email is michael@pelotonscc.net. But going to my website is the best bet. And obviously, I'm on social media like LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. But the portal that has everything is my website.
You also have a book that you've written. It's called Shift, Creating Better Tomorrow. Can you briefly tell us what is that about?
Yeah, so it's about my last bad day. So the reader gets an insight on in terms of like what happened on that day, and then my recovery through it, taking me from that moment to actually getting back on the bike. But the cool thing about the book, there's actually a couple cool things. Well, there's more than that, but I'm biased because I'm the author. But in the last chapter, I give 20 ways of being to help people move from human doer, and I was a bit of a human doer, as we've talked about before the accident, and move into being a human being. So I give 20 ways back to the be, do, have, 20 ways of being to have more of it. So like being aware, being accepting, being forgiving. So forgiveness is number 3. Mm-hmm. Gratitude is number 8. So it's not necessarily a how-to, but definitely some seeds are planted for people to step in to transforming themselves from human doer to human being. And the really cool thing about, this is probably the coolest thing about Shift, is that all the proceeds go to charity. They go to a charity based in Chicago called World Bicycle Relief. And they help girls conquer the challenge of distance by giving them mobility. They give them a bicycle. And they're in countries like Kenya, Malawi, and Zaire, and Zimbabwe. And they're walking to school 6 kilometers each way. And they get to a certain age and they have to think about dropping out. Or if they're going to stay in school, they they get on the back of a motorbike driven by a young man, and that just exposes them to sexual violence. So World Bicycle Relief comes in and gives them a bicycle. So that long walk is now a short bike ride. And when they stay in school, they graduate, they marry later, they have smaller families, but more importantly, they have economic vitality, they have independence, they're empowered, and their life changes. And those in their village, their lives change. And then there's a ripple effect. I'm a kind of guy that believes if you change a life anywhere, you change lives everywhere. And it's really cool that my last bad day can turn into brighter days for a whole bunch of people. So every book that we sell helps build more bikes. And I wrote it for the message that we can overcome our challenges with the right mindset, the right approach, having a strong network around us. So many people are like, when I left corporate America, they're like, you got to write a book. You got to write a book about your story. It's going to be great for speaking engagements, which I do. Or it'll be great for your business. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. But it didn't feel right. I wasn't fulfilled by that. And I know a lot of people write their books and it is all about that. And I do not begrudge them. I think it's awesome. But for me and my story, I was like, this is bigger than just that. I want to reach people that need this dose of inspiration and make it really relatable, and not necessarily like I had my last bad day and then I climbed Mount Everest and that's the definition of success. I want to make the definition of success well within reach for every common man and woman. Because I believe if we all can get to our best versions of who we can be, our own definitions of complete success, then the planet's better. It's more peaceful. It's more loving. And that's what in a small way, that's what I hope Shift can do, make that spark.
Wow, that's an amazing way. I mean, what you're doing is fantastic, but what you just said there is amazing. That's a great way to also wrap up the interview. Michael, it was a pleasure. You gave us some great insights into mindsets. You gave some actionable ideas. It was a pleasure having you, and thanks for sharing your wisdom.
Well, thanks for having me, and to all your listeners, I hope you got a pearl or two out of it. It was a great way to spend a beautiful Saturday afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks, folks, for listening to yet another episode of the CareerMetis Podcast. I have written a brief summary of the interview with also the links to the resources that Michael has mentioned, and you can find them in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode and also learned something new, feel free to post a comment or a review. And if you really, really loved it, definitely go ahead and share this amongst your network. Until next time, this is Nisar Ahmed, your host for the CareerMetis Podcast. Thank you.